the complete annihilation of Midian. Moses, disregarding the expected consequences of the war on himself, gladly went into battle, but Israel did not want to obey his summons to war. The same people who once prompted Moses to say, "They are almost ready to stone me," and who now learned that their leader Moses was to die at the end of this war, tried to evade it, saying that they preferred to forfeit impending victory rather than to lose their leader. So each one hid himself so as not to be picked out for the war. God then told Moses to cast lots to decide who would go into battle, and they had to go, even if against their will. The call to battle was as follows: "Arm yourselves for war, to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian." Moses spoke of the Lord's revenge, but God designated this war against Midian as Israel's revenge. For Moses said to God, "Lord of the world, if we had worshipped the stars and planets, the Midianites would not hate us. They hate us only on account of the Torah and the commandments you gave us, so you yourself should avenge them." Moses did not in person lead the war against Midian, for he was mindful of the proverb, "Cast no stone into the well from which you have drawn water." And he, who as a fugitive from Egypt had sought refuge in Midian, did not want to make war on that land. He relinquished the leadership of the people to Phinehas, for he that begins a good deed will also complete it. And it was Phinehas who had begun God's war against the Midianites by killing the princess Cosbi, Zimri's mistress. Hence the task of completing the war fell to him. Phinehas, as a descendant of Joseph, had another reason for wanting to take revenge on the Midianites, as it had been Midianites who sold Joseph as a slave in Egypt. The force under his command consisted of 36,000 men, 1/3 to take active part in the battle, 1/3 to guard the baggage, and 1/3 to pray, whose duty it was in the course of battle to implore God to lend victory to the warriors of Israel. Moses passed on to Phinehas not only the Holy Ark, which Israel always takes into battle, but also the Urim and Thummim, that he might, if necessary, consult God. Outside of this, Phinehas also received the gold plate of the mitre from the high priest's forehead, for Moses said to him, "That knave Balaam will by means of his sorceries fly into the air, and will even enable the 5 Midianite kings to fly with him. Therefore hold up to them the plate of pure gold on which is engraved God's name, and they will fall to the earth." He did as Moses commanded, and truly Balaam and the 5 kings fell to earth. They then executed Balaam according to the 4 forms prescribed by Jewish law. They hanged him, kindled a fire beneath the gallows, struck off his head with the sword, and then dropped him from the gallows into the fire below. Although Israel undertook the war against Midian on God's bidding, to take vengeance for the wrong that had been done them, still their method of warfare was most humane. They attacked the cities of the Midianites from 3 sides only, so as not entirely to cut off flight. Victory was on the side of Israel, into whose possession fell the cities and all their temples, idols, and palaces. The same fate overtook all 5 kings of Midian. All were slain, just as all of them wanted to destroy Israel. Balaam, who had come to Midian from his home in Mesopotamia in order to receive his reward for his counsel not to fight Israel, but to tempt them to sin, instead of a reward, met his death at the hands of the Jews. The gruesome end of Balaam. This arch-magician at first tried to escape Israel's power by sorcery, for when he saw Phinehas and the leaders of the hosts of Israel, he flew into the air, a feat which he accomplished by magic arts with the assistance of his wizard sons, Janes and Jambres. At the sight of Balaam flying high in the air, Phinehas shouted to his army, "Is there anyone among us who can fly after this villain?" The Danite, Zaliah, a past master in the arts of sorcery, followed this summons and flew high into the air. Balaam, however, surpassed him and took a path in the air on which Zaliah could not follow. And after the former had soared through 5 layers of air, he had quite vanished from Zaliah, who did not know what to do. Phinehas, however, came to his aid. By means of a magical invocation, he dispelled the clouds that covered Balaam, and then Zaliah forced Balaam to descend to the earth and appear before Phinehas. He began to beg Phinehas to spare his life, promising never again to curse Israel. But Phinehas replied, "You are the Aramean Laban, who tried to destroy our father Jacob. Then you went to Egypt to destroy Jacob's seed, and when they left Egypt, you incited the wicked Amalek to harass us, and you did attempt to curse Israel. But when you saw that your attempt to curse us was useless, since God would not hear you, you gave Balak the despicable advice to deliver up the daughters of his land to prostitution, to tempt Israel to sin, and were in part successful, for 24,000 Israelites died in consequences of their sin with the daughters of Moab. Therefore, your life will not be spared." He then ordered Zaliah to kill Balaam, admonishing him, however, to be sure not to kill him through the holy name of God, as it does not befit so great a sinner to meet his death in such a way. Zaliah now tried in vain to kill Balaam, for through his magic wiles he was guarded against every weapon, until Phinehas at last gave Zaliah a sword on both sides of which were engraved a serpent, with the words, "Kill him with his own game, through this he will die." And with this sword Balaam was killed. His corpse was not buried, but his bones rotted, and from them arose several species of harmful snakes, the kind that bring disaster to human beings. Even the worms that devoured his flesh were turned to snakes. The magicians made use of these snakes for 3 different types of enchantment. For the heads, the bodies, and the tails, each had a different effect. One of the questions that the Queen of Sheba put to Solomon was how to withstand these different kinds of enchantments, and the wise king knew even this secret, which he then imparted to her. The victorious return from the war. After the close of the campaign against Midian, the warriors returned with rich spoils to the camp of Israel. But they were such pious and honorable men that they did not lay claim to the booty, but rendered it up so that it might be divided among all. As they were honest and conscientious in the relations between man and man, so likewise they were very strict in their observance of religious statutes. Throughout the time of the war, not a single one of them neglected even the slightest religious ceremony, even if it was only to put on the phylactery of the forehead before that of the arm. But they were especially careful never again to be tempted by the Midianite women. If they entered a house to take its treasures, they did so in pairs, one blackening the face of the women, the other seizing their ornaments. In vain would the Midianite women cry, "Are we not creatures of God, that you treat us so?" Then the Israelites would say, "Were you not the cause that so many of us found their death?" Justly, therefore, could these pious men say to Moses, "Not one among us has committed a sin or an unchaste action. We have brought the Lord's oblation to make atonement for our sins." Moses then said in surprise, "You contradict yourselves. What need of atonement is there if no man among you is guilty of sin?" They replied, "It is true, Moses. 2 by 2 we approached the women, one blackening their faces and the other taking off their earrings. But even though we committed no sin with the Midianite women, still the heat of passion was kindled in us when we took hold of the women, and therefore by an offering we seek to make atonement." Moses then set out to praise them, saying, "Even the common men among you are filled with good and pious deeds. For a man that was under conditions that enabled him to sin, but controlled himself, has done a pious deed. Not to mention the pious and chaste men among you, whose pious deeds are legion." As among those who had been slain in Midian there was a Jewish apostate, the warriors were polluted, and hence might not enter the camp, but had to stay outside. Moses, in his meekness, did not, however, wait for them to come to him, but hurried to them. When, however, he heard that they had killed only the men, but not the women, his wrath was kindled against the leaders of the army, for on the leaders falls the blame and faults of the people. He reproached them, pointing out to them that it had been the women who really had brought disaster on Israel at Shittim. But Phinehas replied, Our teacher Moses, we acted according to your instructions. You told us only to avenge ourselves of the Midianites, but made no mention of the women." Moses then ordered them to execute all the women of the Midianites that were ripe for marriage, but to spare the young girls. In order to determine the difference in age, all were led past the gold plate of the mitre on the priest's forehead, and this had the effect of making those who had been doomed to death grow pale. In punishment for Moses' outburst of anger, God caused him to forget to communicate to the soldiers outside the camp the laws of purification. These were then announced by Eleazar, Aaron's son. It was not, however, proper for him to pronounce a law in the presence of his teacher Moses, and he was accordingly punished for his lack of reverence. God had previously said that whenever Joshua wanted to question God, he was to stand before Eleazar the priest and ask him by the judgment of the Urim and Thummim. But this did not come about. In all his long career, Joshua had no need of asking Eleazar's counsel, so that the latter lost the honor that had been intended for him. The occasion that led to the war against Midian had been Israel's seduction by the Midianite women, but these had succeeded only after first intoxicating the sinners with wine. Phinehas, to be sure that this might not be repeated in the future, put the earthly as well as the heavenly ban on all those who should drink the wine of the heathens, for the latter used it only as libations to their idols and for immoral purposes. In pronouncing this ban, he called on the ineffable name and on the holy writing of the 2 tablets against its transgressors. Wealth that brings destruction. God gave 3 gifts to the world: wisdom, strength, and wealth. If they come from God, they are a blessing; otherwise, they bring ruin. The world had 2 great sages, Balaam among the Gentiles and Ahithophel among the Jews. But both of these, on account of their wisdom, lost this world as well as the world beyond. There were 2 great heroes in the world, Samson in Israel and Goliath among the Gentiles, but both met death on account of their strength. There were 2 wealthy men in the world, Korah among the Jews and Haman among the Gentiles, and both perished on account of their wealth. A similar fate overtook the 2.5 tribes that stayed on the heathen side of the Jordan. These had grown very rich in cattle through the spoils of the Midianites, and therefore preferred the pasture land on the heathen side of the Jordan. But later on their wealth brought them destruction, because they were afterwards the first that were driven from their dwelling place into exile. How intent these people were on their possessions is shown in the words which they presented their wish to Moses, saying, "We will build corrals here for our cattle and cities for our little ones," showing that they rated the cattle higher than their children, for they thought of their animals before they considered their children. Moses did not call them to account for this, but showed them in unmistakable words that it was their duty first to consider men and then animals, by saying in his reply to these tribes, "Build cities for your little ones, and then corrals for your sheep." The land which these tribes had selected was indeed of great excellence, as even the names of the cities indicate. One was called Ataroth, garlanded with fruits; a second, Dibon, flowing with honey; a third, Jazer, help, for its possession was great help to those who owned it. The other cities in this region that were named on account of the excellence of the soil were Nimrah, gaily covered, for the ground of this city was gaily covered with fruits; Sebam, perfume, whose fruits scattered a fragrance like perfume; and Nebo, produce, because it was distinguished for its excellent produce. The last mentioned city, like Baal-Meon, did not retain its name when it passed into Israel's possession, for they did not want to have cities that bore the name of idols, and therefore gave them new names. Many another town as well received a new name from the Israelites, just as Noba gave his own name to the city of Kenath that he had gained by arms, hoping in this way to immortalize his name, for he had no children. His name was, however, not preserved in this way, for after his death the old name Kenath returned again. It was also among the possessions of these 2.5 tribes that Moses shortly before his death founded the cities of refuge. Moses in this instance illustrates the proverb, Whoever loves pious deeds never has enough of them. Although God told Moses that he would never cross to the other side of the Jordan, he still insisted on at least determining the site of the refuge in the region of the East Jordan. God then gave Moses the law concerning the cities of refuge in accordance with Israel's wish. For the people said to God, "Lord of the world, you promised us a long life as a reward for fulfilling the commandments. But suppose now a man has slain another unintentionally, and the avenger of blood slays him, he will die before his time." God then said to Moses, "They do speak wisely. Appoint therefore several cities of refuge, that the manslayer who slays his neighbor unintentionally might escape there." Moses rejoiced greatly at this law, and instantly set about its execution. For he that has tasted of a food knows its flavor. And Moses, who had been before obliged to flee on account of having slain an Egyptian, knew the feelings of the man who was pursued on account of manslaughter that he committed unawares. Moses' death irrevocably doomed. When God, in wrath against Moses and Aaron, vowed, "Therefore you will not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them," Moses tried to implore God to do away with this sentence, acting in accordance with the precept, "Do not attempt to dissolve your neighbor's vow in the moment he has made it." Moses waited 40 years before he approached God with the request to permit him to enter the promised land with Israel. This occurred when he received God's command to appoint Joshua as his successor, for now he perceived that God had actually resolved to execute his sentence. For although God had 10 times decreed that Moses was to die in the desert, still Moses had not troubled himself much about it, even when the resolution had been sealed in the heavenly court. He thought, "How often did Israel sin, and yet when I prayed for them, he annulled the punishment. Surely God will accept my prayer if I, a man who has never sinned, should pray to him." Moses also had a special reason for assuming that God had changed his determination concerning him. For he had been permitted to enter the land of Palestine lying on this side of the Jordan, the land of Sihon and of Og. And from this he reasoned that God had not irrevocably decreed punishment for him, and that it might therefore now be voided. He was strengthened in this assumption by the fact that after the conquest of the East Jordan region, God revealed to him the instructions as to how the land was to be divided, and it seemed to him as if he were in person to carry out these instructions. He was, however, mistaken, for shortly after these laws had been revealed to him, God informed him that he could look on the promised land from Mount Araban, as he should never enter it. When God saw that Moses was not much concerned about the impending punishment, he sealed the command he had issued against him, and swore by his ineffable name that Moses should not march into the land. Moses then put on sackcloth, threw himself on the ashes, and prayed not less than 1,500 prayers for the annulment of the divine resolve against him. He drew a circle about himself, stood in the center of it, and said, "I will not move from this spot until this judgment has been suspended." Heaven and earth, as well as all the forms of creation, trembled and said, "Perhaps it is God's wish to destroy this world and create a new universe." But a voice sounded from heaven and said, "God's wish to destroy the world has not yet come. The commotion in nature is due to this, that in God's hand is the soul of all living things, and the spirit of all flesh, even the spirit of the man Moses, whose end is at hand." God then told them to proclaim in heaven and in all the celestial courts of justice that they should not accept Moses' prayer, and that no angel was to carry Moses' prayer to him, because Moses' doom of death had been sealed. God quickly called before him the angel Achraziel, who is the celestial herald, and told him to proclaim the following in heaven: "Descend at once and lock every single gate in heaven, that Moses' prayer may not ascend into it." Then the heaven and earth trembled, all the foundations and all the creatures. For Moses' prayer was like a sword that slashes and tears, and can in no way be parried, for it was in the power of the ineffable name. But when the Galgalim and the Seraphim saw that God did not grant his prayer for longer life, they all opened their mouths, saying, "Praised be the glory of the Lord, For there is no injustice before him, no forgetfulness, no respect of persons, the small or the great. Moses' prayer for suspension of judgment. Moses began his long but fruitless prayer by saying, Lord of the world, consider how much I had to bear for the sake of Israel until they became your people and possession. I suffered with them. Will I not then take part in their rejoicing? Look, by forbidding me to enter the promised land, you give lie to your Torah, for it says, In his day you will give the laborer his wage. Where then is my wage for the 40 years during which I labored for the sake of your children, and for their sake suffered much sorrow in Egypt, in the desert, and at the giving of the Torah and the commandments? With them I suffered pain. Will I not behold their good fortune as well? But you tell me I may not cross the Jordan. All the time that we were in the desert, I could not sit quietly in the academy teaching and pronouncing judgment, but now that I should be able to do so, you tell me that I may not. May the mercy in you precede your justice, so that my prayer may be answered. For I well know that there is no mercy in justice. You yourself told me, when I asked how you conducted the world, I owe nothing to any creature, and what I do for them is a free gift. Therefore, as a free gift, grant now my prayer. You yourself pointed out to me that it is your wish that people should pray to you to cancel punishment that was laid on them. When Israel committed that terrible sin, the worship of the golden calf, you said to me, Leave me alone that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. Then I thought, who can restrain God that he should say, Leave me? It is plain that he desires me to pray for his children. And I prayed, and was answered. The prayer of the individual for the community was answered, but not so the prayer of the community for one individual. Is it because I called Israel rebels? But in this I only followed your example, for you too called them the sons of rebellion. You called me, as well as Leviathan, your servant. I sent up prayers to you, and Leviathan did likewise, and you answered him. For you made a covenant with him that you keep, but the covenant that you made with me you break. For you said, Die on the mountain that you go up. In the Torah your words are, If the servant will plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and I will not leave, then his master will bring him to the judges, and he will serve him forever. I implore you now, hear my cry, attend to my prayer. You are not in the position of a judge of flesh and blood, who, when granting a request, has to consider that he may be compelled by his superior to repeal his answer. You can do what you want. For where on earth or in heaven is one so mighty that he can do such deeds as yours in Egypt, or who can perform such mighty deeds as you did at the Red Sea? I pray you, therefore, let me behold that land that in spite of the slander of the spies I praised. Moses continued, When in answer to the proposition you made me to go to Egypt and deliver Israel, I said, I cannot do it, for I made a vow to Jethro never to leave him. You released me from that vow, O Lord of the world, as then you absolved me from my vow, saying, Go return into Egypt. Now absolve yourself from your vow and permit me to enter the land of Israel. Then God answered, You have a master to absolve you from your vow, but I have no master. Moses then said, Your judgment against me reads that I will not enter the promised land as king. For to me and Aaron you said, You will not bring this assembly into the land I have given them. Permit me then at least to enter it as a common citizen. That, said the Lord, is impossible. The king will not enter it degraded to the rank of a common citizen. Well then, said Moses, if I may not go into the land as a common citizen, let me at least enter the promised land by way of the Panias Grotto, that runs from the east bank to the west bank of the Jordan. But this request too, God denied him, saying, You will not go from this bank of the Jordan to the other. If this request is also denied me, begged Moses, grant me at least that after my death my bones may be carried to the other side of the Jordan. But God said, No, not even your bones will cross the Jordan. "O Lord of the world," exclaimed Moses, "if Joseph's bones were permitted to be carried to the promised land, why not mine?" God replied, "Whoever acknowledges his country will be buried there, but whoever does not acknowledge his country will not be buried there." Joseph pledged allegiance to his country when he said, "For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews," and therefore he deserved to have his bones brought to the land of Israel. But you, in silence, heard the daughters of Jethro say to their father, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hands of the shepherds," without correcting them by saying, "I am a Hebrew," and therefore not even your bones will be brought into the land of Israel. Moses furthermore said to God, "O Lord of the world, with the word 'behold' I began your praises, saying, 'Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's.' And with that very word, 'behold,' you seal my fate, saying, 'Behold, the day approaches when you must die.'" God replied to this, "A wicked man in his envy sees only the profits, but not the expenditures of his neighbor. Do you not recall that when I wanted to send you to Egypt, you also declined my request with the word 'behold,' saying, 'Behold, they will not believe me.' Therefore I say, behold, the day approaches that you must die. And furthermore," continued God, "you said to the sons of Levi when they asked for your forgiveness, 'Enough, you take too much on you.' So too I will answer your prayer for forgiveness. Let it suffice you. Speak no more to me of this matter." "O Lord of the world," again pleaded Moses, "recall the time when you said to me, 'Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people out of Egypt. Let them be led by me into their land, as I led them out of the land of bondage.' But to this also God found a reply. "Moses, recall the time when you said to me, 'O my Lord, I pray you, send him who you will send.' With the measure that a man uses will measure be given him. I announced death to you with the word 'behold,' saying, 'Behold, the day approaches that you must die,' because I want to point out to you that you die only because you are a descendant of Adam, on whose sons I pronounced death with the word 'behold,' saying to the angels, 'Behold, the man has become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also the tree of life, and eat and live forever, he must die.' Moses then said, 'O Lord of the world, to the first man you gave a commandment that could easily be obeyed, and yet he disobeyed it, and therefore merited death. But I have not transgressed any of your commandments.' God, behold, Abraham also, who sanctified my name in the world, died. Moses, yes, but from Abraham came Ishmael, whose descendants arouse your anger. God, Isaac also, who laid his neck on the altar to be offered as a sacrifice to me, died. Moses, but from Isaac came Esau, who will destroy the temple and burn your house. God, from Jacob issued 12 tribes that did not anger me, and yet he died. Moses, he did not ascend into heaven, his feet did not tread the clouds. You did not speak with him face to face, and he did not receive the Torah out of your hand. God, let it end. Speak no more to me of this matter. Speak not many words, for only a fool multiplies words. Moses, O Lord of the world, future generations will perhaps say, had not God found evil in Moses, he would not have taken him out of the world. God, I have already written in my Torah, and there has not again ever since risen a prophet in Israel like Moses. Moses, future generations will perhaps say that I probably acted in accordance with your will in my youth, while I was active as a prophet, but in my old age, when my prophetic activities ceased, I no longer did your will. Moses still continued to beg God, saying, With justice and mercy you created the world and mankind. May mercy now conquer justice. In my youth you began by showing me your power in the bush of thorns, and now in my old age I beseech you, treat me not as an earthly king treats his servant. When a king of flesh and blood has a servant, he loves him as long as he is young and strong, but casts him off when he is old. But you did not cast me off in the time of old age. You showed your power in revelation of the 10 Commandments, and your strong hand in the 10 plagues you brought on Egypt. You created everything, and in your hand lies the power to kill and give life. There is no one else who can do these works, nor is there strength like yours in the future world. Let me then proclaim your majesty to the coming generations, and tell them that through me you parted the Red Sea, and you gave the Torah to Israel, that throughout 40 years you caused manna to rain from heaven for Israel, and water to rise from the well. For Moses thought that if his life were spared, he would be able to everlastingly restrain Israel from sin, and to hold them forever in faith to the one God. But God said, "Let it suffice you. If your life were to be spared, men would mistake you, and make a god of you, and worship you." "Lord of the world," replied Moses, "you already tested me at the time when the golden calf was made, and I destroyed it. Why then should I die?" God, "Whose son are you?" Moses, "Amram's son." God, "And whose son was Amram?" Moses, "Izhar's son." God, "And whose son was he?" Moses, "Kohath's son." God, "And whose son was he?" Moses, "Levi's son." God, "And from whom did all of these descend?" Moses, "From Adam." God, "Was the life of any one of these spared?" Moses, "They all died." God, "And you wish to live on?" Moses, "Lord of the world, Adam stole the forbidden fruit and ate of it, and it was on account of this that you punished him with death. But did I ever steal anything from you? You yourself wrote of me, my servant Moses, who is faithful in all my house." God, "Are you worthier than Noah?" Moses, "Yes. When you sent the flood over his generation, he did not beg your mercy for them, but I said to you, if you will forgive their sin, well and good. But if not, I pray you, blot me out of your book which you have written." God, "Was it perchance that I counseled you to slay the Egyptian?" Moses, "You killed all the firstborn of Egypt, and will I die on account of one single Egyptian?" God, "Are you perchance my equal? I slay and restore to life, but can you revive the dead? Enough!" Next, God tries to comfort Moses concerning his death. End part 70 of 95, thelegends of the Jews.com.